Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, and welcome to another edition of Sabbath Sunday. This is where Darin and I get together with you on a Sunday to talk all things Black Sabbath. It's been a little while since we've done a Sabbath Sunday, but we're back, and we're going to be talking about the Hulu documentary Into the Void: Life, Death, and Heavy Metal. And we're going to be focusing on the first episode simply titled Randy Rhoads, which focuses on Randy and his time with Ozzy, the tragic plane crash. If you haven't seen it, there's interviews with Sharon Osbourne. There's old clips of Ozzy talking about Randy. Randy's sister is interviewed in it. Randy's sister's husband is interviewed in it. And Tommy Aldridge is interviewed. I think Rudy Sarzo's in there too. So there's a lot of people. It was how long was it, Darin? Is it an hour long? I think
45 minutes. 45
45
minutes.
minute 45 minutes. Yeah, they supplemented, of course there's pictures and the little bit of footage that exists of Ozzy with Randy. There's some of that. They also splice in some what looks to me like AI sort of footage, but it tends to be like shadowy type of things, silhouettes and things like that, just to kind of fill it
Yeah.
out, I guess. So we thought it would be fun to just get together and talk about it. Darin and I both watched it. We're obviously big Black Sabbath fans. We have a podcast called Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast. So make sure you check that out. We're both big Randy fans. So we thought it would be fun to just talk about this particular episode. So Darin, what were your expectations going into it, and how did you feel at the end after you had watched it?
I don't know what my expectations were. I saw a picture of the band, the Blizzard of Oz band. It wasn't the original, or you could even say the real Blizzard of Oz band. It's the band with Rudy and Tommy Aldridge, Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge on the Hulu website. And I guess that was probably a pretty good indication what I was in store for, and that's about what it was. It's history is written by the victors, and I think that's where we are right now. I don't think we can expect a whole lot of accuracy at this point. I mean, it is what it is. But your question is, what were my expectations? I guess my expectations were for it to be pretty much focused on Randy Rhoads growing up, about him playing guitar, about him in Quiet Riot, about him, in LA, slugging it out in the clubs. And then, probably I thought around the middle towards the end, him joining Ozzy's band. But it was mostly about Ozzy and as Randy fit into Ozzy's career. And of course, Sharon Osbourne is in it. And, she gets real emotional, which is, I guess, to be expected. I'd like to think it's sincere. I hope it was sincere. But they do talk about, there is some background on Randy while he was in Quiet Riot. Um, it's respectful to Randy, I would say. There's nothing I don't think anybody would take issue with as far as how Randy's treated in it. Historically, I guess is pretty accurate. Um, and I love Randy Rhoads. I think he was an amazing guitar player. I mean, I listen to Blizzard and Diary all the time, and I'm never bored with those records. Every time I listen to them, I'm drawn to Randy's playing, and it's as amazing to me now as it was, maybe even more so back in the early '80s. So not to take anything away from Randy, but as Randy fits into Ozzy's career, I think he's given a little bit more credit than is really warranted or accurate. There's only two times, no, actually, there's only one time that Bob Daisley is mentioned, and it's for 2 seconds. And Lee Kerslake is mentioned at the same time, right after Bob Daisley, for another 2 seconds by Tommy Aldridge. I was surprised to see Tommy Aldridge in it. We haven't heard I don't think I've ever heard anything from Tommy Aldridge regarding the accident, um, or even Randy Rhoads at all. I've seen interviews with Rudy, so that wasn't a surprise. But I was pleasantly surprised to see Tommy. And to Tommy's credit, he is the only one that mentions Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake. So kudos to that. Um, but like I said, the whole thing is the narrative is basically Ozzy was fired from Black Sabbath and was down and out, which is true. I'm sure that's true. Sharon rescued him. It doesn't go into any detail in the documentary about how Randy comes in, other than he auditions, and there's an interview, a short interview with Randy describing the situation about him plugging in and not really even have anything, just warming up. We've all heard the story before. Ozzy heard Randy warm up and basically told him he had a job in so many words. So there's that, and that's pretty much historically accurate. But it didn't go into how Ozzy and Randy met up. And I guess in 45 minutes, what can you really cover in that amount of time? But the way that it's laid out, it's misleading. It makes you think that so Ozzy auditioned Randy, and then Randy came in and basically wrote the entire album, wrote both albums all by himself, and gave Ozzy this music. Sharon gives Ozzy credit for writing the melody. She said at one point that post Black Sabbath, Ozzy was obviously invigorated. He was influenced and inspired by Randy. His melodies were the best they'd ever been. It was like an updated version of Black Sabbath. And that's great. But it's all attributed to Randy. And it's not necessarily true. I mean, from what we've learned through Bob Daisley's book, through various sources, interviews online, numerous sources, Bob Daisley was really the one who shaped Ozzy's career. And I think that even though the episode wasn't about Bob Daisley, obviously, I think he deserved more than just 2 seconds. And I think they didn't necessarily have to talk about Randy in that context. Talk about what an amazing guitar player he was, talk about how tragic the accident was, all that stuff. But they take it in a direction where I don't think it needed to go. I don't think it was necessary. I think they could have been respectful to Randy and told Randy's story without putting him as the one who's responsible for those two albums. It was Bob Daisley, and with Randy's help, and to a lesser degree, Ozzy Osbourne, and also Lee Kerslake, as Lee joined at the tail end of Blizzard of Oz and contributed No Bone Movies, and then Lee was a pretty big part of Diary of a Madman. So those two guys don't really get their due, and it's like, you know, either don't mention them at all or give them the justice and give them the due that they deserve. So that bothers me because I think at this point, I mean, obviously the people that watch this, it's going to be a rather large audience, and it's going to be people that are going to watch it, and this is going to be what they think it is. This to them, this is like the bona fide history of Ozzy in the early days, and Randy Rhoads wrote everything, and he saved Ozzy Osbourne. And as we know, it was when Ozzy went back to England, he met Randy through Dana Strum, and but he did leave Los Angeles. He moved back to England, and he was jamming with some people, and he ran into Bob Daisley, and he invited Bob Daisley to come to his house and jam with him, and Bob did, and they had a good time. Bob said, we got a good thing going here, but these guys that you're playing with now, they're not going to cut it. You need to get rid of them. You need to get some world class musicians. So, so Ozzy got up and he fired him right away. But he told Bob that he had met a guitar player in California when he was there, and Bob said, "Well, bring him out. Let's get him in here." And that's what they did. Ozzy called David Arden, who I guess was, well, I mean, at the hierarchy was Don Arden, and then I guess it went to David, and then Sharon finally at the lowest rung. handle the day-to-day things, I guess. But to get permission to get Randy to England, of course they had to ask David Arden, and David Arden gave Randy a plane ticket. Bob picked him up. He took a plane to the train. Bob picked him up at the train station, and they started playing together. They started writing songs together. Randy came in with the riffs. Bob came in with lyrics, as we all know, and structure. Kind of like was the one who organized everything, put this together. Really instrumental in shaping these albums and really beneficial to Ozzy as well as Randy. Very underrated musician, very underrated person in all of this. And so that bothered me. I mean, either give him his due or just don't talk about that aspect at all. If you're not going to deal with it properly, then just don't talk about it. Just talk about Randy, what a gifted guitar player he was. Talk about his origins. Talk about his love for classical guitar and all those other things. Then we get into the plane crash, and I wasn't there. I don't know. These guys were, so I mean, they know more than I do about it. But I know that Don Airy was there, and I know Don Airy took some photographs. I think he witnessed the whole thing. Why wasn't he interviewed? We're talking about the plane crash. As far as I know, Tommy was inside the bus, and so was Rudy. They didn't really see what was going on. According to the documentary, Tommy had just woke up, was making a cup of tea, and smelled fiberglass, and the wing of the plane came into the van or the bus. So he didn't see what was going on, but Don Airy did. Why not interview Don Airy? Let's dig a little deeper. We're going to talk about it. And I guess it's my thing I keep coming back to. If you're going to talk about it, do it with accuracy. They basically constructed this history of Ozzy and they put it out there. It's the first episode. And I think, without being too cynical, I think it basically was designed to write a history of Ozzy in the early days and his relationship with Randy and how Randy died. And they kind of put this all together and they were creative with it. And I remember quite a few years ago, there was the theory that the bus driver slash pilot was going through a divorce and his ex-wife was on the bus and there was some speculation or there was a theory that he was trying to scare her or she was standing next to the bus when he buzzed it, but that was something that was there was no real validity to it, at least at the time that I became aware of it. Well, in the documentary they all talk about it. Sharon brings it up, and that was kind of surprising because I didn't think there was really any validity to that theory that the pilot bus driver um, was trying to scare or hurt her or whatever the motive was. I thought that was one of those things. It was kind of like a out of left field theory, but here they bring it in and they talk about it. So I was kind of surprised by that. Um, but I mean, I guess it was cool. I mean, we know too much of you and I and probably a lot of other people watching know too much about the real fans know too much about what happened and who's responsible for what and all this other stuff. So this is really for people that maybe have a casual interest in Ozzy Osbourne or heavy metal in general. And I didn't watch any other of the other episodes of this thing. I pretty much was kind of disenchanted with the first one, so I didn't really go on any further than that. But that's my takeaway. It was a great opportunity to present history accurately, and it failed. It missed the mark. So that's where I am.
Well, I had no expectations going into this. When I heard that Hulu was doing this documentary, I didn't even read about it because I just assumed it was going to be some hour and 15-minute program for people that don't know anything about heavy metal, and it's going to be the same old stories. They'll talk about Black Sabbath for 2 or 3 minutes, about how Tony Iommi lost his fingertips. They'll talk about Ozzy biting the head off a bat. They'll talk about Nikki Sixx overdosing on heroin. The same like stories you hear over and over again when things like this tend to do documentaries on heavy metal when it's not done by other metalheads. So I was kind of surprised when I saw that there was an episode on Randy. And for those who haven't seen it or don't know anything about it, it's 8 episodes, and each episode focuses on uh, I'm reading the AI overview. It says the series covers several dark and historical moments in heavy metal. So you get Randy, there's an episode on Dimebag, there's an episode on Wendy O. Williams. So it's kind of one of these shows there's a bit of mystery to these things. There's a little bit of true crime to these things. There's a little bit of tragedy to these things, dark tragedy. I'm a fan of like these crime documentaries, and I watch Netflix things like The Worst Roommate Ever, stories about people and crazy roommates and unsolved mysteries and stuff like that. So I like that kind of stuff. Like you said, I'm a huge Randy Rhoads fan. He was my guitar player when I first started getting into heavy metal. I was crushed when he passed. I've read every story. I've been on every forum. I've read every book, So going into it, I did not expect to learn anything. And I can't honestly say that I necessarily heard anything that I haven't heard one variation on or another. I was a little surprised that Randy's sister, her husband was there. I've never seen her husband before. He tells a story about driving a truck to get Randy's stuff and bringing that back. I've never heard Randy's sister talk about. I mean, I've heard her talk about when she heard that Randy had passed, but the way she told the story about how, she went over her mom's house, and her mom was there in the corner in shock, and I just never heard her say that. So that was moving, to hear her say that. I did not expect them to say anything about Bob and Lee, just because those who don't know out there, Bob and Lee sued Ozzy and Sharon, and so there was all kinds of fighting in court. They removed them from certain reissues of Blizzard of Oz and Diary. So there's been bad blood. I did not expect them to mention them at all. Tommy Aldridge mentions them he mentions them, which I guess is great. I was happy to see them get some
Yeah.
acknowledgement. To Of course, I would have rather it had gone more in depth, and I would have rather it had brought up Bob and the real story. Like you said, the history is written by the victors. Sharon tells the story that like if her side of the story is like she uh, got Ozzy back on his feet and helped him put the band together. When it's really, when you read Bob's story, it was like they were already kind of up and running, and Sharon was sort of in and out. She wasn't his manager at that point. Sharon's father, Don Arden, was. Where's the truth? It's probably somewhere in the middle, because as the way these things are, I can't remember, what I did. I can't remember what I did last week, least of all what I did 30 or 40 years ago. Then again, nobody is asking me over and over again what I did on a particular month 30 or 40 years ago. If I had to retell that story 1,000 times, maybe I would remember what I was doing this month 30 years ago. Uh, but to play the other side of this, against what you were saying, to fit the theme of what these episodes were, there were only 45 minutes. All these episodes are about tragedy and stuff like that. So it's understandable that they're not going to waste any time talking about Quiet Riot, that they're going to skip over a lot of the explaining who Dana Strum is and stuff like that, which we've talked about this before. But if Dana Strum, he's the guy that hooked up Randy with Ozzy for the audition. You can look up on YouTube Dana Strum telling this story, and it's brilliantly done. Dana does one of the best Ozzy impersonations out there. I highly encourage you to watch it. It's not only informative but very funny. So, I kind of knew that they were going to, especially once I watch. I didn't watch all the other episodes in this series. I watched like maybe two or three of them. It makes sense to me now why they did it. This isn't a history of Ozzy Osbourne. It's about Randy. It's mostly about the tragedy of the plane crash. Uh, I mean, if you sat down and how much of this is about the plane crash, probably at least 15 minutes of it. So a third of it, a quarter of it is focused on the plane crash. Uh, so it's not really about Ozzy and the history of the band and stuff like that. They're kind of getting to the plane crash. I even think in the beginning, like the little trailer blurb right at the beginning before the episode starts, I think that's what they talk about right away is like the tragically cut down in his youth thing. So, I mean, is it a missed opportunity? I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess I would have liked for them to have been a little bit more historically accurate about the Blizzard of Oz and the way that was all put together, the way that all happened. But I get it for what this is. They're gonna gloss over stuff like that. And when you're somebody like us that knows every little minutia, every little detail about these things, it kind of stands out to us. Like, oh man, well, you skipped over this, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention, that's not at 100% accurate. They're just blowing through things really quickly. And so yeah, I mean, somebody probably who doesn't know anything about Ozzy and Randy maybe watches this and again, it does paint this picture like Ozzy and Randy. He wrote all the music, and which isn't true. Bob wrote the lyrics. Bob was an integral part of the writing, but maybe their perspective on it was like, hey, Randy's the guy that wrote the Crazy Train riff that everybody and their grandmother recognizes. That's probably playing at a sports arena as we speak. So, maybe that was their kind of thought, like, well, he's the main songwriter. And again, I don't know who's put this documentary together. I'm guessing that there's somebody with some sort of musical knowledge of heavy metal, but probably nobody who's a real specialist, on these things who could have added some more nuance and depth to these things. So I wasn't expecting anything. I guess I would say I was just surprised at all that Bob and Lee even got mentioned. Because quite honestly, if you had asked me before this, I would have said, "I'll bet you anything that Sharon said you can't mention their name in this documentary." So I was shocked that she was in it and they mentioned Bob and Lee. And I was just happy that they did something with Randy, that he got this kind of attention like this. And it's only 6 or 8 episodes, so they could have done. I'm sure they could have picked somebody or something else or some other event to cover. So I was just happy that they did it, and maybe somewhere down the line it would be really nice to get a real proper told from all sides story of the early years because with things like this everybody knows in their personal life, right? Have you ever had a disagreement with somebody and you see it one way and the other person sees it a different way, and neither person is necessarily wrong. It's just sort of the perception and the angle that you're looking at things. So and I think over time certain stories gain traction. I've done a couple episodes on my channel, heavy metal mythbusters, I think I called it, and I talked about like how there's these certain myths that get perpetuated harmlessly, but they're just stories that get told that they just fall into the public lexicon. And it's just gets accepted as truth. Like Tony Iommi lost his fingertips, so that's why he tuned his guitar down. No, he didn't. The first two Black Sabbath albums aren't tuned down. So that's just flat out not true. But it's just one of these stories that somebody probably it got over the years. It's that game you played in grade school, whatever it was called, telephone line or whatever. By the time the story gets to the 25th person, it's changed from a rabbit into an elephant. Uh, as far as the plane crash, I mean, again, I've read every story I've read. My attitude, I mean, we could do a whole episode just on this, but I'll just say that my attitude towards this is whenever something tragic like this happens, it's really hard to just accept that it just happened, right? Sometimes bad things happen to good people. Uh, but I think in our minds, we don't want to accept that. We want there to be give us some reason why this happened. This guy was crazy and he wanted to hit his wife, or the other popular theory is that the hairdresser was in the plane with Randy and the pilot, and she had a bad heart. She had a heart attack, and it was a student plane, and she stepped on, and that caused this. Some people have that theory because Don Airy says he could see with his high-powered camera there was a struggle in the cockpit, and at the end of the day, it doesn't change it. Same thing with Bon Scott. Same thing with Jim Morrison or Jimi Hendrix or Dimebag or, anybody who's tragically passed too early. It's unfortunately, it's just sometimes it's just the simplest explanation. It's just it was an accident. Something went wrong, and it's hard to accept that. And but sometimes that's all it is. I'll say another thing that I didn't know. I always knew that the woman that was in the plane that also passed, Rachel Youngblood, was Sharon's nanny, I guess, like when she was younger or something. And I knew she was the hairdresser. Worked with the seamstress hairdresser for the band. But Sharon mentioned something about how close she was to her. Like she was like a mother to her. And I don't know if he said she raised her, but she sort of implied something like she was like a mother person to me. And I didn't realize that. I thought that she was somebody who worked with the family, had been working in her family for a long time, and she was close to her just because she was somebody who had worked in her family and she was friends with her. But it sounds like it was even beyond that. It sounds like she was an actual maternal figure to Sharon. So that added another layer of tragedy that people often forget that there was three people in the plane. It was Randy, it was Rachel, and it was the pilot. And another thing I'll also say to just to put this to rest, people jump on this and say, he had his pilot's license was suspended. For everybody out there that drives, just because you lose your license doesn't mean you don't know how to drive a car anymore. You're just legally not supposed to be driving your car. Now, granted, the guy shouldn't have been flying the plane because he didn't have a pilot license, just like you shouldn't be driving a car if your license is suspended. I mean, maybe that says that this guy is reckless. If it says anything, that it says that this guy is reckless. Apparently, there was some other kind of accident with this guy involved. So, maybe that is something that you could point to and say, well, this guy he had lost his license, pilot license for being reckless or not following instructions or something like that. So, maybe that could imply that here's a guy that doesn't respect the rules or something like that. Like somebody who loses their driver's license is somebody who doesn't obey traffic laws or something like that. So I don't know. In the end, I wasn't expecting anything. So whatever I got out of it, I just kind of did. I just kind of did. And somewhere down the road, hopefully we get the full-blown documentary where the whole story is told.
Yeah, I don't know if we ever will. If there is a story in a longer version, it's only going to be an elaboration of what we saw in the Hulu documentary. I'm pretty sure. And I wasn't even going to watch it at all, but a friend of ours, friend of the podcast, friend of Sabbath Sundays, Greg Vickers,
Mhm.
Up on
Shout out to Greg.
shout out to Greg. Up on a messenger, and he's like, "Have you seen that Randy Rhoads episode of The End of the Void?" And I said, "Nah." He's like, "Oh," and he's just going on about it. He was upset. So I mean, real fans, and there are a lot of us, people that are knowledgeable. It's not just for the novice. It's not just for the casual person that wants to quickly learn about heavy metal. I mean, a lot of people that have a vested interest in this stuff and a long
This
time.
appeals to people who, like I mentioned, people like me who like true crime documentaries, who like super stories of the supernatural,
Yeah,
hauntings and things like that. This is what this appeals to. So
yeah,
somebody who doesn't know anything about any of these people, who Dimebag is or Wendy O. Williams. I mean, like in fairness, I mean, I know who Wendy O. Williams is. I know a tiny little bit about her history. But when I watched her episode, probably 75% of that I didn't know about her. And how much of it is accurate, I don't know. I've never read any
who
books on her.
knows?
It's probably somebody who's really into Wendy O. Williams that's angry at the Wendy O. Williams episode,
Exactly.
you
Yeah,
know.
and that's a great example because I mean, I like the plasmatics. I like Wendy. Um, but I don't know a lot about her history. I don't. I mean, I don't really know that there's a lot of information. I mean, I guess if you really dig for it, you'll find it, but it's not as readily available as things as information about Ozzy's history and Randy. But I mean, so if I were to watch this, then I think after the 45 minutes of that show, I would feel as though I know quite a bit about Wendy O. Williams, even though from a true fan's perspective, I probably am getting wrong information or inaccurate information. But because I don't know anything else, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to somebody possibly and say, oh, well, Wendy O. Williams did this and that and the other thing. And that's what I'm talking about with the impact or the effect that this Randy Rhoads thing. People maybe don't, they know who Ozzy is, they know who Randy Rhoads is, but they don't really know a lot about any of this stuff. And then this is really their historical resource for this because they just really haven't taken the time, or maybe they didn't have the interest to really dig deep into it. But watching this, they're going to learn something, and it's just not really going to be totally accurate, but they'll feel as though now they have knowledge of this stuff. And then that's going to be basically the narrative that's going to be out there for who knows until something else comes along that clarifies. And then it'll be one thing versus the other. Which one's right? Which one's wrong? But I hope for the sake of posterity that the people who deserve credit and just it is an interesting story. I mean, the story of Ozzy Osbourne, and I'm sure there's going to be a biopic. I mean, there's already talk about it. The story of Ozzy Osbourne is pretty fascinating, even to somebody who's not a heavy metal fan. I think probably the focus is going to be on his relationship with Sharon, and maybe I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see any of it. Maybe that is the most important thing. But there's going to be liberties taking as far as what her things that she can take as being responsible for. There's going to be liberties taken. Things that maybe aren't really didn't have much to do with her are suddenly going to be all about Sharon. It's going to be all about Sharon and Ozzy. So I don't know. Best thing I could tell anybody who's really interested in it, maybe this whet your appetite for learning more about how Ozzy did the first Blizzard of Oz records or how Randy came in. Check out Bob Daisley's book, For Fact's Sake. Read that. Poke around on the internet. Read stuff by Martin Popoff. Very knowledgeable. Went right to the principal players and interviewed them and got their stories. So that maybe this is just a springboard to move on and really dig deep and find out if you're interested. Maybe
Yeah.
you're not. Maybe you don't care. That's fine too. But if you do, there's a lot of other sources to get the accurate information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let us know down in the comments. Did you guys see this episode? Is Hulu a streaming free service or do you have to pay for it?
Yeah. Well, no, you got to pay for it.
Isn't it
There's
like
two versions.
bundled in with like Disney Plus and And what I'm getting at is I didn't even know I had Hulu. Somehow we do. I think it's packaged in with like Disney Plus or some other things. So you may have Hulu and don't even realize it. There may be some
Yeah.
version that you know just stream it yourself. I don't know. It could be on YouTube for all I know at this point. But let us know down in the comments if you've seen it and what your thoughts are. What was your takeaways from it? What did you expect? How did you feel when the whole thing was over? And yeah, let us know in the comments down below. And make sure you check out our podcast, Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast. And Darin and I will see you at the next Sabbath Sunday.